Hello, my name is Elizabeth Taylor, and this is the story of how I finally brought justice to my family after 22 years of silence. It began at what was supposed to be a peaceful Thanksgiving dinner, but ended up changing everything forever. At our family's Thanksgiving gathering, the dining room was filled with the rich aroma of roasted turkey and the gentle clinking of wine glasses. The table was beautifully set with our finest china and crystal, creating what should have been a picture of American family harmony. My cousin Chloe suddenly stood up from her chair, pointing her manicured finger directly at my face as she burst into cruel laughter. "Look at this pathetic girl with no mother to teach her manners," she sneered. "What makes you think you deserve a seat at our family table?" The elegant dining room fell into complete silence. Every relative seated around the polished mahogany table turned their eyes toward me, eagerly waiting for the drama to unfold. This was always their favorite entertainment, watching me squirm under their collective judgment. My father, Kenneth, began trembling with rage and humiliation, but I remained surprisingly calm. I had been preparing for this moment for longer than anyone could imagine. I carefully set down my silver fork, letting it rest gently beside my porcelain plate. My gaze traveled slowly past Chloe's smug expression to focus on the woman whose face had suddenly drained of all color, my Aunt Angela, Chloe's mother. "Aunt Angela," I said softly, my voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "Didn't you tell Chloe that I still have her paternity test results in my possession?" The sound of my fork touching the plate had been barely audible, yet it seemed to echo through the room like thunder. The cheerful conversation and gentle clinking of glasses that had filled the air moments before vanished completely. Even the carefully prepared Thanksgiving feast, the golden roasted turkey, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie suddenly looked like props in a still life painting. My cousin Chloe, who had always been so arrogant and cruel, stood frozen with that ridiculous smile still plastered on her face. She looked as though someone had grabbed her by the throat, leaving her speechless in her expensive designer dress that now seemed completely out of place. Every pair of eyes in the room shifted from me, the supposed object of ridicule, to the woman sitting beside the head of the table. Angela Martin had always maintained perfect composure and an elegant smile, but now I watched her face transform before my eyes. The healthy rose color drained from her cheeks at an alarming rate, leaving her looking ashen and sickly. Her fingers gripped her wineglass so tightly that her knuckles turned white, and though her lips moved desperately, no sound emerged. Those eyes that usually sparkled with cunning calculation now held nothing but pure terror, like a deer cornered by hunters with nowhere left to run. "You are talking complete nonsense!" Chloe's shrill voice finally cut through the deadly silence. She had snapped back to reality, and her young face was now twisted with rage and humiliation. "Elizabeth! You are a pathetic liar! Just because you don't have a mother doesn't give you the right to spread these disgusting lies about my mom. What kind of sick person are you?" She lunged toward me like an angry cat with its fur standing on end, but my Uncle Brian quickly grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "Enough! Haven't you embarrassed us enough already?" Uncle Brian barked at Chloe, though his piercing gaze remained fixed on me with obvious warning and disgust. "Elizabeth, what has gotten into you today? Apologize to your Aunt Angela immediately." My grandmother, seated at the head of the table in the position of family authority, had a face that had turned darker than storm clouds. She clutched her linen napkin with white knuckles, and her voice came out dry and raspy, filled with absolute authority that brooked no argument. "Get out of my house!" Grandmother's voice cracked with fury. "The Taylor family has no place for someone as ill-bred as you. Get out of my house this instant." My father Kenneth's face had turned the color of liver, and his lips trembled as he tried to stand up and defend me. However, under my grandmother's murderous glare, he sank back into his chair like a wilted plant, unable to even lift his head. This was my father, a man so honest that he had become pathetic. My heart sank a little, but I had grown accustomed to his weakness long ago. I ignored all the shouting and accusations swirling around me. My gaze remained fixed on Angela's face, like a nail driven deep into wood. I could see her eyes flickering frantically, unable to meet mine, and I recognized the subtle panic that signaled her inner defenses were about to collapse completely. I smiled quietly. The sound was soft, but it made Angela's entire body shake violently. "Dad, we're leaving," I announced, standing up and taking my coat from the back of my chair. My tone was as calm as if I were commenting on the weather. My father jumped up gratefully and stumbled after me, clearly relieved to escape. The entire room, full of relatives, watched us with a complex mixture of curiosity, contempt, and malicious satisfaction, as if they were observing two rats fleeing in defeat. As I passed by Angela, I stopped briefly. Without looking at her directly, I leaned close enough that only she could hear my whispered words. "Aunt Angela, my patience has limits." I could feel her entire body go rigid, like a statue frozen in time. Without another moment's hesitation, I took my father's arm and walked out of that house that had suffocated me for over 20 years. The front door closed behind us, shutting out the chaos and suspicion that I knew would soon erupt inside. I understood that from this day forward, this family would never return to its former false peace. The trial had begun, and I was the one holding all the evidence. The early winter wind cut across our faces like knives as we walked through the residential neighborhood. The houses lining the street glowed with warm lights. These were typical homes in a Midwest American suburb where families were enjoying their Thanksgiving reunions. My father followed behind me in complete silence, his heavy footsteps and labored breathing the only sounds between us. We walked until we reached a quiet street corner outside the middle-class community before he finally grabbed my hand. "Elizabeth, what you said back there about that paternity test, what exactly is going on?" His voice was filled with anxiety and confusion. "How could you say something like that in front of so many people? Your Aunt Angela, she—" "Dad," I interrupted, looking at his worried face and feeling my heart ache. "Do you trust me?" He looked stunned, confusion flickering in his clouded eyes. "Of course I trust you. You're my daughter." "Then don't ask any more questions," I said gently, pulling my hand free and adjusting his jacket collar that had been messed up by the wind. "Let's go home. It's cold out here." The Uber ride home was warm and sheltered from the bitter cold outside. My father sat awkwardly beside me, starting to speak several times before falling silent again. Finally, he sighed and turned his attention to the flickering neon signs passing by the window. I knew what he was thinking. He was afraid that I had created some enormous scandal, terrified that we would never be able to hold our heads up in this city again. This was typical of him, always ready to retreat and endure. When we returned to our 2-bedroom apartment in the east side of the city, the familiar, comforting sense of home surrounded us. I poured him a glass of hot water and suggested he get ready for bed. Then I went to my room and locked the door. From the deepest corner of my closet, I pulled out a locked metal file box. Inside lay a yellowed envelope, and as my fingers traced its rough surface, I was transported back to that suffocating summer afternoon 1 year ago. It had been my grandmother's 85th birthday, and my father couldn't get away from the factory to deliver a gift we had prepared for her. Though I didn't want to go, I didn't want to cause him any more trouble. When I arrived at my grandmother's 2-story colonial house, only Angela was home. She told me that grandmother was at the community center for a senior citizens gathering, and I could just leave the gift and go. As I was preparing to leave, her iPhone rang. She glanced at the caller ID. Her expression changed slightly, and she hurried into her bedroom with the phone, partially closing the door behind her. Through the crack, I could hear her suppressed voice, filled with frustration and anger. "I've told you countless times, stop calling me. Money? Is that all you ever talk about? Do you think I'm an ATM? What paternity test? Are you insane? I destroyed that thing long ago. Chloe is Brian's daughter. She has nothing to do with you. If you dare spread lies, I'll drag you down with me." The words paternity test exploded in my ears like thunder. My heart rate went wild, blood rushing to my head. I instinctively hid behind the wall, holding my breath. After she finished the call and I heard her footsteps and the front door closing as she left the house, a wild idea began growing in my mind. I barely hesitated before pushing open her bedroom door. The room still carried her heavy perfume scent, Chanel No. 5. I began searching frantically through closets, drawers, and nightstands, finding nothing. Just as I was about to give up, my eyes fell on an old suitcase on top of the closet. Standing on a chair, I struggled to bring it down. The suitcase contained outdated old clothes that smelled of mothballs. In the hidden compartment of the case, I felt something hard, an envelope. This was it. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might burst from my throat. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and pulled out several papers. It was a DNA paternity test report from LabCorp Laboratory. At the bottom of the report, the conclusion burned into my eyes like a branding iron. Based on DNA analysis results, Brian Taylor is excluded as the biological father of Chloe Taylor with 99.99% certainty. I read those words over and over, feeling as though all the blood in my body had frozen. So the girl I had called my cousin for over 20 years was not actually my uncle's biological daughter. The golden princess that the entire family had cherished was actually the real illegitimate child. Meanwhile, I, the one who had been called badly raised all my life, now held the proof of her true parentage. How absurd, how deeply ironic. In that moment, I didn't feel any immediate urge to expose everything. Instead, I calmly used my phone to photograph every page of the report clearly, then returned the original to its hiding place and restored everything exactly as I had found it. After completing this task, I left the house as if nothing had happened. For the past year, I had silently endured the increasingly vicious humiliation and oppression from Angela and Chloe, tolerating my grandmother's obvious favoritism and cruelty. I had been waiting for the perfect opportunity, waiting for a chance to make them fall so hard they would never recover. Chloe's cruel words at Thanksgiving dinner about me being badly raised were the signal I had been waiting for. Now, the time had come. Looking at the photos stored on my phone, a cold smile crossed my lips. Angela, did you think destroying the original would keep you safe? Everything you had carefully built, the daughter you were so proud of, your position in this family would all crumble because of this report you had forgotten about long ago. And this was only the beginning. I also suspected that my mother Michelle's sudden departure 22 years ago might also be connected to this secret. Angela, what you owe me and what you owe my mother, I will make sure you pay back with interest. Early the next morning, my father's phone began ringing incessantly like something possessed. When I woke up, I saw him standing helplessly in the living room, his face looking even worse than the day before. "Hello, sister." "No, he stammered. "Second aunt, it's not what you think. Elizabeth, Third uncle, let me explain." He tried desperately to defend me, but his voice grew weaker and his shoulders more hunched with each call. Eventually, he could only repeat, "Yes, I understand, and I'll talk to her." After hanging up, he collapsed onto the sofa as though all his strength had been drained away. I walked over and took his phone. There were dozens of missed calls and hundreds of unread text messages. I opened the Facebook group called Taylor Family, and it was already in complete chaos. Angela had posted first, writing a long, tearful message accusing me of being jealous of Chloe's good grades, beauty, and popularity with the family. She claimed that my jealousy had twisted my mind, leading me to forge paternity test documents to slander her and Chloe. She painted herself as a kind, long-suffering relative who had endured harassment from her troubled niece for the sake of family harmony. Then my grandmother had posted in her typical authoritative tone, "Elizabeth has been psychologically unhealthy since losing her mother as a child." This kind of behavior doesn't surprise me. Kenneth, control your daughter. Bring her to apologize to Angela immediately on her knees, or don't bother calling me your mother. Uncle Brian quickly followed with his own statement. I know exactly what kind of person my wife is. Elizabeth must pay for her malicious behavior. Soon, every distant relative came out of the woodwork to condemn me. What an ungrateful girl, and Angela has been so good to her. This is what happens to children without mothers. Their hearts turn bad. Kenneth should be ashamed for raising such a daughter and bringing disgrace to the Taylor family. Message after message felt like poisoned daggers, their malice palpable even through the screen. They condemned me without asking for any explanation or giving me any chance to defend myself. My father looked at the flood of insults, with tears forming in his eyes. He grabbed the phone with shaking hands, trying to type a defense. Dad, ignore them, I said, placing my hand over his to stop him. My voice remained calm. But they, he said desperately, sweat beading on his forehead. How can they say such things about you? I have to tell them you're not like that. Would they believe you? I asked quietly, looking directly at him. He froze, his anger deflating like a punctured balloon. He was right, they wouldn't believe him. In their eyes, my father was worthless, and I was an unwanted burden. Meanwhile, my uncle's family represented the hope and pride of the Taylor name. Elizabeth, maybe we should just let this go, he said, slumping against the sofa in exhaustion. We can't fight them. Just apologize, and this will all be over. My heart felt gripped by an icy hand, cold and hard. I looked at him, my only family member, whose first instinct when facing outside pressure was always to retreat and compromise. Dad, if I apologize, it means admitting that I was lying and slandering them. After that, I'll never be able to hold my head up in front of them again. But what choice do we have? You know your grandmother's temper and your uncle? If retreating and enduring actually worked, we wouldn't have spent the last 20 years living like this. I interrupted, my voice taking on a hardness I hadn't realized I possessed. Dad, this time I refused to give in any more. My father stared at me as though seeing a stranger. Just then, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered, and a sarcastic voice came through. Is this Elizabeth? I'm a colleague of your Aunt Angela. I heard you've been forging documents and spreading rumors about her. How can someone so young have such a poisonous heart? Do you really deserve to work at your company? I'm calling your boss right now to let them see what kind of person you really are. Angela was moving fast. Not only was she trying to destroy my reputation among relatives, but she was also attempting to ruin my career. She was trying to push me toward complete destruction. I felt no anger or panic, only cold determination as I spoke into the phone. Go ahead and call them. Then I hung up decisively. Looking at my father's face, distorted with fear, I told him clearly, Dad, can you see? We have no way to retreat now. Either we would be trampled into the mud and never recover, or we would climb over their fallen bodies to stand tall. Facing the storm of public opinion that Angela had unleashed, I chose silence. I didn't respond to any messages or answer calls from any relatives. For an entire day, I watched like an outsider as the circus performers jumped up and down on my phone screen. My father, Kenneth, paced restlessly around the living room, checking on me every few minutes and muttering, "What are we going to do?" under his breath. I understood his anxiety, but I knew that explanations would be pointless right now. Words of defense were powerless against deeply rooted prejudice. I needed a sharper knife to pierce through the armor of lies they had woven. It wasn't until late at night that the flood of abuse in the family Facebook group finally began to quiet down. I opened my photo album and found an image in an encrypted folder. It was an old yellowed photograph showing a much younger Angela with the big curly hairstyle popular in the 1980s. Her face wore a shy, sweet smile as she nestled in the arms of a man who was not my Uncle Brian. He wore a fashionable leather jacket and had the rock star haircut that was trendy in that era. One hand intimately encircled Angela's waist while the other rested on her shoulder. His eyes held a hint of arrogance and satisfaction. The two appeared completely intimate. Without any explanation, I posted this photograph in the Taylor family group, adding only one line. "Aunt Angela, I found this while organizing old items. Who is the man in the photo?" The group, which had finally settled into quiet, erupted like a depth charge had been dropped into still water. Dead silence lasted for about 30 seconds. Then my phone began vibrating frantically. It was a private message from Angela. "Elizabeth, where did you get that photo? What exactly are you trying to do?" Her string of exclamation points revealed her complete panic. "Delete that photo immediately. Do you hear me?" Her tone was commanding, but it also carried the hollow ring of someone whose bluff was being called. I took my time typing a response. "Aunt Angela, don't get excited. This is just the beginning." After sending that message, I ignored her completely. In the group, people were already beginning to whisper among themselves. "Who is this man? He doesn't look like Brian." Angela was quite adventurous in her youth, wasn't she? "This photo looks pretty old. Where did Elizabeth dig this up?" Angela had obviously seen the group discussion, and she began posting frantic explanations. "Everyone, don't misunderstand. This is a distant cousin of mine. We grew up together and were close, so taking a photo together is perfectly normal." Elizabeth has completely lost her mind, using an old photograph to cause trouble. Her heart has turned black. Her explanations were full of holes and only made things worse. What cousins would pose for photos in such intimate positions? Moreover, she had never mentioned having such a distant cousin before. Uncle Brian's profile picture lit up. He tagged me directly. "Elizabeth, what is the meaning of this?" Even through the screen, I could feel his questioning and suspicion. For the first time, he wasn't automatically defending Angela. Once the seed of doubt is planted, it grows like wildfire. I didn't respond to him. Instead, I walked to the living room and handed my phone to my father. "Dad, look at this." My father took the phone with trembling hands. As he read through the group chat, his expression changed from worry to confusion to satisfaction. She's panicking," he murmured. "Yes, she's panicking," I confirmed. "Dad, we haven't done anything wrong. We don't need to be afraid. The people who should be afraid are those with guilty consciences." I watched as my father's furrowed brow gradually relaxed, and his hunched shoulders seemed to straighten slightly. I knew it would take time for him to completely overcome his weakness, but today he had seen the effects of fighting back. That was enough. This would be a sleepless night for many people. As for me, I turned off my phone and slept more peacefully than I had in years. Angela's fighting spirit was more tenacious than I had expected. Or perhaps it was my grandmother's favoritism that gave her the confidence to keep battling. When the war of public opinion didn't work in her favor, they immediately deployed their cruelest weapon, cutting off our livelihood. On the third day, my father received a call from his direct supervisor, who happened to be a distant cousin from our Taylor family. The message was simple. He should resign voluntarily. The reason given was damaging the company's image. My father worked at a small auto parts factory that my grandmother had co-founded years earlier, which my uncle later took over. It was essentially a family business. My father had worked there for 20 years, climbing from an ordinary worker to workshop supervisor. He earned a modest salary and worked diligently, never daring to complain. This job was his only source of income, the economic foundation of our small family. Now they wanted to destroy our means of survival. After hanging up, my father completely collapsed. He sat on the sofa with his head in his hands, his body trembling slightly. "It's over. Everything's ruined." He repeated these words, his voice filled with despair. My phone rang at the perfect moment. It was Angela. As soon as I answered, her triumphant, sharp voice came through. "Elizabeth, do you see now? This is what you get for opposing me. Your father is unemployed now. You and your father can look forward to starving. I'm giving you one last chance. Right now, immediately, bring all your forged documents to grandmother's house and kneel down to apologize to me and Chloe. Promise never to mention this again. Otherwise, I'll not only make sure your father never finds work, but I can also make sure you can't survive in this city. Do you believe me?" Her voice carried the tone of a victor, as if she had already crushed me completely underfoot. Looking at my father's devastated appearance, my heart felt as though it were being stabbed with needles. Flames of anger burned in my chest, but I knew that in moments like this, staying calm was crucial. I took a deep breath and spoke to Angela in a voice as steady as still water. "Aunt Angela, do you really think that controlling my father's job means you control my lifeline?" Angela paused, apparently not expecting this reaction. What do you mean?" "What I mean is," I said, walking over to my father and taking his cold hand, speaking both to the phone and to him. "Dad, we don't need that lousy job anyway. The humiliation you've suffered all these years should finally end." Then, in front of my father, I opened my mobile banking app. I turned the phone screen toward him so he could clearly see the long string of numbers. "Dad, look carefully. This is the money I've saved from working all these years, plus some investments I've made. Even if neither of us worked for the next 10 years, we wouldn't starve." My father froze, staring at the balance with disbelieving eyes wide open. He had never known that his daughter, whom he still thought of as a child, had quietly built a financial foundation strong enough to support our entire family. "Elizabeth, you—" His voice choked with emotion. Speaking to Angela on the phone, I continued. "Angela, listen carefully. My father doesn't want that job anymore. As for apologizing, forget about it. The game is just beginning. We'll take our time playing." With that, I hung up directly and blocked her number. Looking at my father, I could see the despair in his eyes gradually fading, replaced by shock and the light of hope. "Dad, trust me, we won't lose." After comforting my father, I returned to my room and closed the door. From that encrypted photo album, I found the contact information for the mysterious man in the photograph. This was information I had obtained a year ago, after getting the paternity test results. I had spent considerable effort and resources tracking down this information through various channels. The man's name was Carlos Rivera, Angela's first love and a worthless drifter with no legitimate work. Using an anonymous email account, I sent him a message. The content was simple, just 2 sentences. "Carlos, do you remember Angela Martin? You might not know this yet, but you have a daughter named Chloe Taylor. She's 17 years old now and lives like a princess. Meanwhile, you have nothing." The email was sent successfully. I deleted all traces of the anonymous account. "Angela, you wanted to cut off our lifeline? Now I'll show you what it means to invite a wolf into your home. Did you think I only wanted to expose your lies? No, I want your entire world to collapse completely." The wolf I had unleashed, Carlos, arrived faster and more ferociously than I had imagined. On the fourth day afternoon, Uncle Brian called my father's phone, his voice raging like an enraged bull. "Kenneth, what the hell has your precious daughter done now? Some lowlife is at my front door causing a scene, claiming Chloe is his daughter. Our family's reputation is completely ruined." My father was stunned by the shouting and instinctively looked at me. I took the phone and put it on speaker. "Uncle Brian, I didn't ruin your family's reputation. Your wife created this mess with her own actions. Now her creditor has come to collect." "Elizabeth, how dare you? Did you bring this person here? You evil woman!" Through the phone came Uncle Brian's furious roaring, mixed with women's crying and the sound of things being smashed. Complete chaos. "Uncle, instead of wasting time yelling at me, you should ask that virtuous wife beside you how many years she's been cheating on you." I hung up immediately after saying this. Soon, the family group exploded again. A relative who lived near Uncle Brian's house posted a video. In the video, a slovenly dressed man with a face full of crude features sat on the front lawn of Uncle Brian's house, shouting at the gathering neighbors. "Brian Taylor, come out here, you piece of garbage. You slept with my woman and raised my daughter, and now that you have money, you think you can just ignore your debts? Neighbors, help me get justice here. They're hiding my daughter Chloe and won't let me see her." The video was short but packed with explosive information. The group fell into instant silence. The relatives who had previously rallied around Angela were now struck dumb, not daring to say a word. Then someone posted another video. In this one, Uncle Brian burst out of the house and began wrestling with Carlos. He was like a maddened bull, throwing punch after punch while cursing continuously. Angela ran out with disheveled hair, crying and trying to break up the fight, but was shoved to the ground by her out-of-control husband. Chloe also ran outside, seeing this chaotic scene, looking at the crude stranger making a spectacle, then at her deranged father and her mother lying humiliated on the grass. She was completely shocked. She stood frozen in place, face pale as death, swaying as if she might collapse. This circus became the neighborhood's biggest joke. The Taylor family's dignity was shredded and thrown on the ground for everyone to trample. That evening, I received a call from the hospital. My grandmother had suffered a heart attack from the shock and stress and had been rushed to emergency care. My father heard the news and immediately panicked, grabbing his coat to rush to the hospital. I stopped him. "Dad, what are you going to do there? Let them point fingers and blame us for making grandmother sick?" "But she's my mother." "Has she ever treated you like her son?" I asked coldly. "When she destroyed your livelihood, did she think of you as her son then?" My father's steps halted and all color drained from his face. Looking at his expression of painful struggle, I softened my tone. "I know you're worried, but now is not the right time. Let them finish their drama first, then we'll go." Even through the phone lines, I could imagine the chaos erupting at the hospital right now. Uncle Brian's rage, Angela's despair, Chloe's breakdown, and all those relatives who had rushed over to point fingers and whisper. What a magnificent performance. I sat on the sofa, quietly appreciating this chaos that I had personally orchestrated. I felt no satisfaction, my heart as calm as still water. I was only thinking that Chloe was probably innocent in all this. She was just a tool for her mother's social climbing and a sacrifice in this dirty transaction. But then again, who in this world isn't paying for their parents' mistakes in some way? just like me, who had paid 20 years for my mother's kindness and weakness. Thinking of my mother made my heart ache again. Angela, grandmother, all of this was merely interest on the debt. The main course hadn't been served yet. The next day, I still accompanied my father to the hospital. When we arrived, the ICU waiting area was crowded with relatives, all wearing grave expressions and whispering among themselves. When they saw us, all conversations stopped abruptly. The looks they gave us were complex mixtures of contempt, curiosity, and barely concealed malicious pleasure. Uncle Brian leaned against the wall, his eyes bloodshot and his appearance haggard. When he saw me, his gaze burned with intense hatred, but unlike yesterday, he didn't rage. He just stared at me deadly, as if trying to bore holes through my body. Angela wasn't there. I heard that after Uncle Brian beat her yesterday. She was too ashamed to show her face. Chloe sat on a bench in the corridor, head down, hair disheveled, looking like a plant destroyed by a violent storm, drained of all life. I ignored everyone and walked straight to the ICU door, looking through the glass window inside. My grandmother lay on the hospital bed, wearing an oxygen mask, her face gray and aged as if she had suddenly become 10 years older. Her eyes were closed, but her long eyelashes trembled slightly. I knew she was awake. I pushed open the door and walked in. My father hesitated for a moment, then followed me. "What are you doing here?" Uncle Brian followed us in, his voice hoarse with challenge. "I came to see grandmother," I said, walking to the bedside and looking down at the frail old woman. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Grandmother, how are you feeling? You really must take care of your health. After all, who else will support that wonderful daughter-in-law of yours?" Grandmother's eyelids trembled violently. "Elizabeth, shut up!" Uncle Brian roared. I ignored him completely and continued speaking as if to myself. "I really can't understand what's so special about Angela that makes you favor her so much. For her sake, you were willing to drive away my mother. For her sake, you allowed her daughter to bully me for 20 years. Was it all because she gave you a granddaughter?" I deliberately emphasized the word granddaughter with heavy sarcasm. You're lying!" Grandmother suddenly opened her eyes, trying to sit up in agitation. Her oxygen mask shifted sideways. "Your mother was the shameless one. She discovered things she shouldn't have and insisted on making a scene. I was protecting the Taylor family name by telling her to keep quiet, but she wouldn't listen. She chose to leave. What does that have to do with me?" In her excitement, her voice became shrill and piercing, nothing like someone who was seriously ill. The entire hospital room fell silent enough to hear a pin drop. My heart lurched, but my face remained calm. Slowly, I pulled my phone from my pocket and pressed the stop recording button. Then I showed that red button to my grandmother on the hospital bed. "Grandmother, thank you for telling me the truth." Grandmother's eyes went wide with shock, her mouth hanging open but unable to make any sound. Her expression froze in absolute shock and regret. She finally realized what she had revealed in her rage. You! She pointed at me, her fingers shaking like a leaf in autumn wind. From the doorway came the sound of a sharp intake of breath. I turned to see my father Kenneth standing there, his entire body rigid and his face pale as paper. He had obviously heard every word my grandmother had just spoken. He stared at his mother on the hospital bed, his eyes filled with disillusionment and pain, as if the entire world he had believed in had just crumbled. The person who had driven away his beloved wife was not some outsider, it was his most respected and obedient mother. His final feelings of affection and hope for his mother vanished completely in that moment. He looked at me, his lips trembling, his eyes full of guilt and heartache. I knew that from this moment, my father was completely awakened. Leaving the hospital, darkness had already fallen. Streetlights came on one by one, stretching our shadows long across the pavement. My father remained silent the entire way, his back hunched as if crushed by that cruel truth. He walked slowly, his steps unsteady, like a lost child. I didn't rush him, just quietly walked beside him. After a long time, he sat down on a street-side bench and covered his face with his hands. I heard his suppressed, painful sobbing escaping through his fingers. This man who had been honest his entire life was now crying like a helpless child. He was grieving for his lost love and repenting for his years of blind devotion and weakness. I didn't comfort him, just silently handed him a tissue. Some pain must be endured alone. After crying for a long time, he gradually calmed down. He raised his tear-stained face and looked at me, his voice extremely hoarse. "Elizabeth, I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry. Your father is useless. Letting you and your mother suffer all these years. If I had been stronger back then, if I had stopped your grandmother when she wanted to drive your mother away, would everything have been different?" Tears flowed down his cheeks again, filled with endless regret. "Dad, this isn't your fault," I said, sitting beside him. "You were just too kind." In that household, grandmother was the absolute authority, uncle was the favored son, and Angela was the smooth-talking daughter-in-law. Only he was overlooked, honest and simple, unable to speak eloquently or fight for anything, always the one ignored and sacrificed. Asking him to oppose the entire family was simply too difficult for him. "I failed you," I said, looking at his graying temples with an ache in my heart. "All these years, I've resented you for being too weak to protect me or my mother. That's why I kept my plans secret from you." I opened my heart to him, telling him about discovering the paternity test, about my year of patience and planning, and about my suspicions regarding my mother's disappearance. He listened quietly, the guilt in his eyes growing deeper. "Good child, my good child." He reached out his rough hand to touch my head, then pulled it back as if he didn't deserve to. "Dad, it's all in the past," I said, actively taking his cold hand. "From today on, we'll face everything together." "Yes, yes." He nodded vigorously, gripping my hand tightly in return. Those eyes that had been worn dull by life now rekindled with a spark of light. "Elizabeth, you go ahead and do what you need to do. From now on, your father supports you completely. We'll take back everything that belongs to us. Then we'll find your mother." His voice no longer held any hesitation or weakness, filled instead with unprecedented determination. The night wind was cold, but holding my father's hand, I felt a warmth and strength I had never experienced before. I knew I was no longer fighting alone. I had the strongest support possible. My father, now fully awakened, showed remarkable determination. When we got home, the first thing he did was drag out a file box that had been gathering dust in the bedroom storage cabinet for years. Inside were his marriage certificate with my mother and various old documents and receipts. He pulled out a yellowed receipt from the pile. "Found it," he said excitedly, handing me the receipt. It was a handwritten receipt from over 20 years ago, showing that Kenneth Taylor had invested $20,000 in his brother Brian Taylor's factory as startup capital. Several names were signed in the witness section. "Back then, your uncle needed money to start the factory. Your mother gathered all our savings, plus the dowry money from her family, $20,000 total, and gave it all to him." My father's voice trembled as he spoke. "Your grandmother said we were all family and just needed a receipt, no need to calculate shares. Your uncle also promised that once the factory made money, he would give us dividends every year." "And then what happened?" I asked coldly. "Well, for the first couple of years he gave us something, but then nothing. Every time we asked, your grandmother would say the factory was having cash flow problems and told us to wait. We've been waiting 20 years. $20,000 20 years ago was nearly several years' worth of savings for an ordinary family. This money, called an investment, was actually stolen by them. Can we still find these witnesses? I asked. Yes, Uncle Bob and Jerry are both still around. Good. I put away the receipt, my mind already working. Dad, we're not just getting this money back, we're going to make them pay with interest. The next day, instead of going to process my resignation, we went directly to Uncle Brian's house. The Carlos incident had caused such a scandal that he couldn't face living in his original neighborhood anymore, so he temporarily moved back to grandmother's house. When we arrived, he was sitting in the living room smoking, filling the entire house with smoke. Angela wasn't there, and neither was Chloe. Only he and our recently discharged grandmother were home. Grandmother was half lying on the sofa, her face still looking terrible. When she saw us, she turned her head away. Uncle Brian saw us, stubbed out his cigarette, and asked impatiently, "What are you doing here? Come to gloat." "We're here to collect a debt." My father slammed the receipt down on the coffee table in front of him. Uncle Brian glanced at it and scoffed dismissively. "This old thing? Ancient history from 20+ years ago. What, now that you've been fired and have no money, you suddenly remember this?" His tone was full of contempt. "Brian, this is our family's life savings." My father's whole body trembled with anger. "What did you promise me back then? You said there would be annual dividends. What happened to that?" "Dividends? Don't you know what condition the factory has been in? We've been losing money for years. I should be asking you for money." Uncle Brian looked completely shameless. "Losing money?" I laughed. "Uncle, do you think my father is stupid and I'm stupid too? That BMW you bought Chloe 2 years ago, that Hermes bag you bought Angela last year, and that vacation house you bought in Florida were all from factory losses?" Uncle Brian's expression changed instantly. "Dad, we don't need to waste words with him." I pulled out my phone directly. "I've already consulted with a lawyer. This receipt, plus witness testimony, is completely sufficient for filing a lawsuit. The $20,000 invested back then, calculated as shares based on the factory's profit ratio over these years, entitles us to demand property division. Additionally, my father worked at the factory for 20 years, and your wrongful termination requires appropriate economic compensation. We've calculated everything. Either settle privately, give us the money, and we'll withdraw, or we'll see you in court." Looking at Uncle Brian's livid face, I continued, "Oh, and by the way, if this goes to court, I'm afraid your affair with your wife and grandmother's role in driving away my mother will all have to be presented as evidence. I imagine the local newspapers would be very interested in the Taylor family story." You dare threaten me?" Uncle Brian pointed at me with a shaking finger. "This isn't a threat, it's notification," I said calmly, looking at him. "Your choice." He was already overwhelmed by Angela's scandal, and his company's reputation had been severely damaged by Carlos's disruption. If news broke now about embezzling his brother's assets and family scandals, his company would be completely finished. He stared at me intensely, then looked at my father, who was clearly unified with me and would no longer speak for him. Finally, he slumped against the sofa in defeat. "How much do you want?" On the day we received the money, the weather was beautiful. Uncle Brian's face looked worse than death, but he still transferred a sum far exceeding our expectations into my father's bank account. He was afraid that I would really take the matter to court and destroy his last shred of dignity and property. With this money, we completely severed our economic ties with that family. But things weren't finished yet. Angela, the woman who had single-handedly caused all this tragedy, had not yet received her proper judgment. She asked to meet me at grandmother's house. She said she had thought things through and was willing to give me a sum of money in exchange for my silence about everything, asking me to spare both her and Chloe. I brought my father to the meeting. When we arrived, grandmother's house was full of people. Uncle Brian, grandmother, and several respected family elders. Angela sat among them, her eyes red and swollen, looking haggard. When she saw me, her gaze held pleading. This setup didn't look like a negotiation. It was more like a trap designed to pressure me into submission using family authority. "Elizabeth, you're here." An elderly great-uncle spoke first, his tone carrying the authority of an elder. "We've heard about everything. Angela did make mistakes, but she knows she was wrong. Family scandals shouldn't be aired publicly. Please, for the sake of your elders, show mercy and let her off." "Yes, Elizabeth," another great-aunt chimed in. "Your uncle's company is already in trouble and can't handle any more upheaval. If this continues, it won't be good for anyone." Angela also stood up and walked toward me, her voice choked with tears. "Elizabeth, this is all my fault, every bit of it. I'm sorry to you, to your father, to Brian. Please, for Chloe's sake, she's nearly been driven mad by all this. I'll give you whatever money you want. I'm begging you to destroy all that evidence." She performed with great emotion, looking pitiful, as if she truly was a repentant sinner. If I didn't know her character, I might have almost believed her. I ignored her and walked directly to my grandmother. "Grandmother, do you remember my mother?" Grandmother's face stiffened, and she avoided my gaze. "Her name was Michelle Lewis. She married my father 22 years ago. She was obedient to you, respected you, treated you like her own mother. But how did you treat her?" My voice wasn't loud, but it struck each person's heart like a hammer. "Just because she discovered Angela's secret, just to protect your precious Taylor family reputation, you drove her away. You separated a loving couple and left me without a mother from childhood. Today, you ask me to show mercy to Angela, but 22 years ago, did any of you show mercy to my mother?" I pulled out my phone and pressed play. Grandmother's shrill, bitter voice echoed clearly throughout the living room. "If your mother hadn't discovered things she shouldn't have and insisted on making a scene, why would she have left?" Everyone's faces changed color, especially the elders who had been brought in to persuade me. Their faces went through various shades of embarrassment. Next, I opened my photo album and projected the paternity test report photos onto the large TV in the living room. The black and white report with its red official seal displayed the clear conclusion: Brian Taylor is excluded as the biological father of Chloe Taylor with 99.99% certainty. "Aunt Angela, didn't you say I forged documents? You can take a good look now and see whether this is real or fake." Angela stared at the TV screen as the last trace of color drained from her face. She collapsed to the floor, making sounds of desperate whimpering. Uncle Brian, the man who had been deceived for 20 years, stared fixedly at those words on the screen, his body swaying unsteadily. He suddenly turned, like a bloodthirsty beast, and lunged at Angela, who was collapsed on the floor. "You whore! I'll kill you!" He kicked Angela in the chest, and the living room instantly erupted into chaos. I took my father's arm and quietly left what had become a courtroom. Outside, the sunshine was beautiful, warming us as it touched our skin. I took a deep breath. The boulder that had pressed against my chest for over 20 years was finally lifted. Everything was finished. After that day, the Taylor family completely disintegrated. Uncle Brian divorced Angela decisively, leaving her with essentially nothing as he desperately tried to distance himself from any connection to this woman. Overnight, Angela went from being a comfortable middle-class wife to a destitute, abandoned woman. Even worse, Carlos, that worthless man, clung to her like a shark smelling blood. He demanded money and wanted Angela to support him for the rest of his life. The two of them fought like dogs, becoming the neighborhood's most widely circulated joke. Chloe couldn't accept the dramatic reversal of her identity from an envied princess to an illegitimate daughter. She locked herself in her room, refusing to see anyone, and reportedly became mentally unstable. My grandmother couldn't withstand the series of shocks and suffered a stroke that left her paralyzed. She lay in bed, unable to speak, with only her eyes still able to move. I wondered if during those immobilized days and nights she ever felt regret for her past cruelty and favoritism. Uncle Brian's company, after we withdrew our funds and with scandals surrounding it, quickly fell into serious financial crisis and was eventually forced to declare bankruptcy. The man who had once bullied us turned gray-headed overnight. We sold our apartment that held too many oppressive memories and received a substantial sum. Combined with what we had recovered from Uncle Brian, we had enough to live comfortably for the rest of our lives. We completely severed ties with that family. On the day we left, my father stood in the empty house for a long time in silence. Finally, he took a deep breath and said to me, "Elizabeth, let's go." His face showed no nostalgia, only the relief of liberation. Yes, it was time to go. Time to leave this prison that had devoured half our lives' happiness and begin our true new life. After getting the money, the first thing I did was mobilize every resource and connection available to search for my mother. When she left years ago, she had taken almost nothing and left no clues. Grandmother and Angela, to cover up the truth, had erased almost every trace of her existence. The search process was more difficult than I had imagined, but my father and I never gave up. Finally, 6 months later, we received news. Someone claimed to have seen a woman who resembled the photograph in a warm, small city in California. My father and I immediately booked flights and embarked on our journey to find family. It was a beautiful, small city with spring-like weather year-round, filled with blooming flowers. Following the address, we found a small flower shop facing the street. A woman wearing simple jeans and a cotton shirt, somewhat thin, was facing away from us, carefully trimming an orchid. Her temples already showed touches of white. My father stood at the flower shop entrance, looking at that silhouette, his body beginning to tremble uncontrollably. He opened his mouth, but the name Michelle that he had longed to call stuck in his throat, unable to emerge. As if sensing our gaze, the woman slowly turned around. Time had left marks on her face, but those gentle, peaceful eyes were exactly the same as in my deepest memories. She saw my father and then saw me. The flower shears in her hand clattered to the ground. Her eyes immediately filled with tears, her lips trembling as tears rolled down like broken pearls. "Kenneth, Elizabeth." She ran toward us, and we moved to meet her. Across the river of 22 years, our family of 3 finally embraced tightly once again. My father cried like a child. My mother was already sobbing uncontrollably, and I cried too, but my tears were hot tears of joy. The shadows of the past were completely dispelled by California's warm sunshine in that moment. I looked up at the brilliant blue sky, knowing that the bright, sunny future belonging to our family had finally arrived.